One Step Ahead by Lundquist and Beslik.
Welcome to One Step Ahead Radio. Another week, another session, and this week we are a bit more positive, James. Welcome again, James, to co-host this with me. It is a positive week, the positive news that we can share for once, I would say, but although we are trying. Yes, of course, Yahoo every week, but this week it's a bit more positive than the previous week and even the week before that. And we hope that the trend of sentiment will continue, as we say, on the financial markets. So this week we can start with interesting news coming out of the actually the outlet Bloomberg covering what is going on the investment side. And this is something that world really needs to know, and people need to share this information because it is a story that contradicts headlines that you usually read about. And the story is about the glory days of investments in renewable energy. And the time for that is actually now. A global benchmark of clean energy stocks is currently outperforming major equity indexes and even gold as investors respond to soaring demand for renewable needs to power. And that is booming, basically, that booming is related to artificial intelligence. And investors are more positive to green stocks, and it's becoming increasingly clear that the energy needed to power artificial intelligence can't be delivered without new renewables. And that is, of course, despite the efforts by the Trump administration to axe green policies in China and India and the US, and some US states are still committed to do this. What is also good and interesting, James, is that Brookfield Asset Management said it raised, listen to this, $20 billion for the world's biggest private fund dedicated to clean energy transition. I mean, this is a very good news for the world. It's good news for people out there, but it's also very good news for anybody working in the renewable energy space, because it seems that that is contradicting, the headlines that is some kind of a backlash. It is actually happening, James.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Welcome, and good to catch up with you again. This is a very strong trend. When I started out in the early days of my career, they had this mantra, which was follow the money, right? So if some things really get a trend, if some things matters, it's not just people talking about it. It's actually people putting their money where their mouth is. And I think both of these news from this week that you mentioned both sort of speak to that topic. And what makes me think is that the ESG investing boom that we saw 5 years ago was very much driven by a boom in enthusiasm for clean energy stocks that kind of then petered out and failed and cratered. So I was just wondering whether you think, to what extent, the ESG investing and clean energy are still so intertwined, whether sort of the whole clean renewable scene is now sort of its own investment trend on its own, maybe sort of doesn't necessarily need to be connected, because a lot of funds sort of got beaten down in that downturn because of the pressures on renewables, the higher interest rates and inflation and cost of steel and all of that really whacked the industry. Wind power in particular was particularly heavily hit. So just thinking aloud about how that's sort of going to affect people's interest in investing, not just in clean energy, but in sort of wider sustainability as well. What's your take on that?
I mean, James, look, the energy need, general energy need in the world will need to double and triple in 10 to 15 years. And there is something that has happened over the last 2 years, which was not really the part of the equation for many people thinking about renewable energy investments. And the thing that has happened is artificial intelligence and this enormous upswing in investments into further development of artificial intelligence in various shapes and forms. And this is actually pointing at another sort of a topic, which the energy need going forward will just be so enormous that all sorts of energy, and especially the one that are renewables, will definitely increase in importance across the world, and it will also serve and needs to serve, as it looks like, the needs of further development and expansion of artificial intelligence. Now, we can discuss if that is wise or not, but that's very much the case. And you can see that even if you're looking at the ways how the Wall Street and financial sector is reacting to nuclear energy. I mean, it's a new darling of financial industry, because companies like Nuclear Energy Incorporated has no revenue, no license from the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and no operating power plant, yet investors have driven its valuation to 2.3 billion. And, you have to think about this, because
so it's anything energy. It's like it's not just clean energy is being swept up in the whole change of the whole sort of dynamic around energy demand that's been driven by AI. So
it's just give me all. I mean, give me everything. Give me renewable energy. Give me.
We talked last week about gas turbines. I mean, it's kind of connecting to so many different. I even read coming in on the train this morning. I read some comments by a Microsoft executive in Asia and Japan. I think talking about their struggle to find sufficient renewable energy in Asia. I think they were talking Japan and Korea. Taiwan, to feed their data and data center needs. So you have those kind of big companies that have these 2030 emissions targets that are looking increasingly wobbly, but they even can't get enough of it, so they have to take energy wherever they're going to get it, and they're hoovering up. So this connects to another great news this week that came out from a lot of coverage of this research by Ember think tank, saying that solar, wind and other renewables in the first 6 months of 2025 generated more electricity than coal-fired power plants.
Hallelujah. That's a good one.
Which is the first time, apparently. And so the world is generating almost a third more solar power in the first 6 months, in the first half, compared to last year, and this is the interesting part, meeting 83% of the global increase in electricity demand. Because a lot of people say, well, yeah, solar is kind of, and renewables are all great, but they're kind of, the growth in demand above all in emerging markets is going to be met through sort of coal and gas. But what's actually, this discussion is that it's actually not happening. That it's renewables and solar above all feeding that, and in particular in China and India, mostly responsible for the surge in renewables, whereas the US and even Europe relying more on fossil fuels. So again, that was a kind of an interesting trend and another tipping point, I think, in that broader story that we're talking about.
But you have to, when we talk about this, you have to take that, these kind of investments or energy needs by data centers around the world will definitely, given the speed of AI development, it's just going to explode. And it's going to require a type of security on the energy, and also what we call a fully integrated solution, where you have self-sufficient sort of a renewable energy powered data centers that will need to be developed, that will need to be paid for, invested in. So, it seems that the roller coaster of renewable energy, regardless of what people think it is or not, will just continue. And the fact is that we need more energy. That's a very simple.
You want to hear a great little story, little anecdote of a company in America that's maybe looking to raise capital in an IPO. Their business model is to send satellites into low orbit with big mirrors so they can reflect sunlight onto solar farms during the night, so that they can extend the production of solar energy and keep them going more than just the normal daylight hours. And they're looking for investors to help fund this mission to go up, and so the demand for energy and to increase returns on solar assets, for example, in this case, a huge demand and surge in batteries and storage. But even people saying like we can deflect the sunlight from space to help make solar produce more. I thought that was an astonishing business strategy.
No, it is. It's. You will see, more very creative solutions going forward on this, and it is obviously One of the topics, I mean, going back to entire sort of a transition towards more sustainable future, in my sort of a book, it's all about energy. It's about how the money and how we finance things. But of course, it's also about how we perceive risk. James, in that context, I read a very interesting piece coming out of UK about the security services issuing a warning that climate change is posing security threat to UK, which is something that you usually don't read about. And it seems to be that this report that was supposed to be released by National Security, UK National Security, is not going to be launched in public. It was supposed to be because there are risks that it will be stopped by number 10 in UK. And I mean, how often do you hear about this, that security services are issuing the threat? I mean, issuing the warning that this could be a threat? I mean, that's not really a common thing, yeah?
Absolutely. It's a very interesting development, apart from its being being halted apparently, and then obviously leaked to the press. As soon as you try and do that, someone's just going to email it to a friendly journalist and see what happens. But yeah, it does raise alarm bells around the wider. There's always been this discussion recently about defense being a prerequisite for building, arming, industrial production. The sort of the emissions related to energy to defense spending is going through the roof. So it's interesting to hear this different perspective. It's around migration from countries affected by climate, biodiversity crisis. Some of these are the biggest risks. Again, an increasing proportion of food coming from from overseas for the UK. Yeah. So these people are very good at sort of looking at these systemic shifts and what they might mean for a country's security and safety going forward.
I mean, I'm also thinking about the fact that there's been a lot of debate in Europe about migration, immigrants, and all of that. But basically, Europe has closed its borders, and it's not really happening to the extent it was before. And people are, in many ways, not really taking the climate change consequences into the new migration waves that will most likely come in the next 50 years. So, I mean, the security organization threat or warning to UK government, it's probably something that should be taken very seriously. It seems that the report has been halted, but I hope that we will see the information in that report, at least some of it, reaching the media and then the people around the world, because it matters. What they say is actually very, very important. Now, James, there is something that happened last week, and it's sort of it was a headline in many outlets covering the sustainability issue investments, and that is the fact that Net Banking Zero Alliance is dead.
Yes.
And it's
long agonized death.
yes. I mean, it started with the American banks, and then it went on to Europe, and then it's sort of I don't know. It's painful process how it sort of ended, but there is a light in the tunnel on this one, because on the other side of this sort of a part of the industry, you have asset owners. Mm-hmm. And as it seems that asset owners, the big ones across the world, are really trying to step up the pace on sustainability focus. And one of them, of course, is Japanese GPIF, which is actually the biggest one in the world. And they are going to increase not only investments, but also pressure on the companies in relation to this. So there is almost a bit like a strange perception in the asset management industry, who is actually serving the asset owners, that by sort of going into the lead of deniers and Trump and all of that, that they will actually keep on getting the job from asset owners to manage money. And that seems to be changing, because many asset owners are actually ditching asset managers not delivering on this. So it seems even in that context, the sentiment is positive, because as long as asset owners are doing what they are supposed to do in this context, it will have immense pressure on asset management industry, and of course the way how we manage our pension money. James, I mean, net zero banking alliance. I mean, what's your take on it? I mean, look, I'm coming from the financial sector. It did have some kind of a pledge influence, but not really much. But what's your take on it?
Yeah, it was this big proclamation that came out of the Glasgow COP a few years ago with Mark Carney leading the charge. It sort of belongs to another period, and I think one of the main issues that really caught a lot of banks unable. I mean, it wasn't just reputational problems; it was also legal and regulatory problems of being. Seeing risks of litigation connected to their whole ESG approach. So it wasn't sustainable, if you pardon the word, in terms of that, and so was sort of put in the crosshairs, and really at that point there was no way that it could be taken forward seriously because it was such an obvious target. So I just hope that, you know, the pressure from above, as it were, in terms of following the money and who actually owns the assets continues, because that's going to be the pressure that continues on banks and finance. In fact, I was reading this week, you know, other stories about surveys of business pointing to how, you know, regulation isn't really driving sustainability primarily. It's other stakeholders, it's business considerations, it's opportunities. And so I think those are going to be the drivers people are looking at now, and not so much sort of big coalitions and formal partnerships, which are very difficult to govern and sometimes end up being a bit of a talking shop.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I think it was a lot of that was a talking shop, and it's also because, I mean, it's voluntary, it's not binding. You know, you can walk away anytime you want. Actually, you know, not really mandated to do any particular change. So I think for probably for many banks, it was a way how to protect themselves in a group. But now they're going to be exposed, because I think you know, the vetting of what banks are doing in this context will continue, and people want to know what is going on. And there is a last one on this week, which I think is also very interesting and positive in a way, and that is that the Shell, the oil company, top executive in the US, has said basically the Trump administration's decision to hold fully permitted offshore wind energy is very damaging to investments, and called for more predictable regulation. I mean, this is not really common that oil and gas companies are sort of voicing their, you know, disappointment with how the regulation works. Because, as you probably know, in the US, there has been a lot of investments going into offshore wind projects, and many have been halted due to the fact that regulation has been declined or they just canceled. Millions of dollars have been invested in them. It's good to see that companies like Shell, and I guess many others, are stepping up the voices against what is going on in the US. James, that will be from my side the trends or the insights for this week. Anything from your side you would like to add?
No, I mean, it's good that we've had a very positive moment and some uplifting trends in terms of where things are shifting on energy and climate and awareness, and, you know, sort of perhaps a sort of colder realization of where we need to go in the coming years, and the implications, even in terms of our own security. So those things hit home, and as you said, we've got a positive spin this week. So I think that's been a very good set of developments that we can take home.
It's almost, James, thank you very much. It's almost like reality strikes back, or maybe even the future combined with reality strikes back. And that will be all for this week. Many thanks for listening. Share this with your friends, family, and whoever you think needs to be part of the conversation. Many thanks, and we will talk again next week. James, thanks again.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye. Have a good weekend.
Have a good weekend. Bye.
to this whole geopolitical chess game that's being played at the moment. And as you were saying right at the beginning, in terms of the American officials putting pressure on Europe, for example, to water down their climate ambitions, it all plays in. You can't just think of one jurisdiction as a closed entity. They're all subject to this kind of constant recalibration of the global economic system since the Trump administration came into power.
Yeah. And this is something I think from political angle, it will be so interesting to touch upon some of these things and also have a look in what is politically on a positive side, what is actually being done on a political side. And I'll do some digging on that during next week. And then maybe we can discuss that and elaborate more and see if we can share that insight with the audience that we have on One Step Ahead Radio, Jim.
Super. Look forward to it. Try and stay positive.
Yeah, well, try to stay positive, heads up, and then we'll see, where the world goes next week. Thank you very much for your time and insight this week. And for everybody listening to One Step Ahead Radio, thank you. And please join us again next week.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye. Have a good weekend.
Bye-bye.